My name is Ella, and I have a complicated relationship with the sound of my own voice. If you met me, you probably wouldn't think much of it, mostly because you'd barely hear me speak. I live in a world where every conversation feels like a high-stakes tightrope walk over a pit of fire. While most people breathe without thinking, I have to plan my breaths, my syllables, and my pauses as if I'm diffusing a bomb. I'm the girl who stands in the back of the elevator, staring intensely at the floor buttons as if they contain the secrets of the universe, just so I don't have to make eye contact with the neighbor I've lived next to for 3 years. I'm the girl who orders a black coffee even when I'm craving a complex latte, simply because black coffee has fewer syllables and a lower chance of making me stutter into a puddle of embarrassment. To me, social interaction isn't a natural flow. It's a series of tactical maneuvers designed to minimize my existence. I've become an expert at fading into the wallpaper, at blending into the background noise of the bustling streets, and at being the ghost in the room that everyone senses, but nobody truly sees. I work in a small, narrow bookstore called the Inkwell in a quiet corner of the city. It's my sanctuary. The smell of old paper, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, and the lack of aggressive social demands make it the perfect fortress for someone like me. My boss, Mr. Henderson, is a man who speaks in fragments and values silence as much as I do. He's 70, wears corduroy jackets that smell like pipe tobacco, and understands that when I point to a shelf instead of explaining where a book is, it's not because I'm being rude, it's because my vocal cords have temporarily gone on strike. Here, among the dusty classics and the smell of vanilla-scented pages, I feel like I have a place. I spend my days organizing the poetry section, which I love because poets are the only people who seem to understand that a single word can weigh a ton. I can spend hours dusting the spines of Bronte and Keats, feeling a kinship with people who are long gone, but who captured the exact kind of internal ache I live with every single day. But then, there's Liam. Liam is the problem in my carefully constructed, silent life. He started coming into the shop about 6 months ago, always on Tuesdays at exactly 4:15 p.m. The first time he walked in, I accidentally knocked over a display of new releases because the mere sight of him made my nervous system short-circuit. He's not loud or flashy. He doesn't have that aggressive look-at-me energy that usually makes me want to bolt for the nearest exit. No, Liam is different. He has this quiet, calm aura that feels like the space between songs on a record. He has messy dark hair that looks like he just woke up from a dream, and eyes that always seem to be searching for something beautiful in the mundane. He usually heads straight for the history section, but lately, he's been lingering by my poetry shelves. And every time he does, my heart starts drumming a frantic, irregular beat against my ribs, a sound so loud I'm convinced he can hear it through my cardigan. Our conversations, if you can even call them that, are a masterclass in awkwardness. He'll pick up a book, look at me with a soft smile that makes my knees feel like they're made of warm wax, and ask a simple question. "Have you read this one, Ella?" he asked last Tuesday, holding a copy of some love poems. My brain immediately provided a brilliant, 3-paragraph analysis of the metaphors and the historical context. But my mouth? My mouth decided to produce a sound that was somewhere between a wheeze and a squeak. I managed to nod so vigorously I thought my head might fall off, and then I spent the next 20 minutes pretending to be extremely interested in the alphabetization of the home gardening section. I could feel his gaze on me, not a judgmental one, but a curious, gentle look that made me want to melt into the floorboards. I hate it. I hate that I have all this depth inside of me, all these words and feelings and jokes, but they're trapped behind a locked door, and I've lost the key. This Tuesday was supposed to be different. I had practiced a sentence in front of my bathroom mirror for 3 days. Just one sentence. That's one of my favorites. The third poem is particularly moving. I said it over and over until it felt like a song. I wore my favorite green sweater, the one that makes me feel a little more substantial and a little less like a shadow. As 4:15 approached, I stood behind the counter, my palms damp, my pulse racing. When the bell above the door chimed, my stomach did a slow, agonizing flip. It was him. He was wearing a charcoal coat with the collar turned up against the drizzle, and he looked at me and smiled. That smile, it's like a warm light in a cold room. He walked over to the counter, not to the shelves this time. My heart stopped. He was coming straight for me. The sentence I had practiced vanished instantly, replaced by a blinding, white static in my brain. "Hey, Ella," he said, his voice low and melodic. "I was wondering if you could help me find something." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, my vocal cords feeling like they were cinched with wire. This was the moment. The carriage has arrived moment of my adult life. I needed to say something, anything, to prove that there was a person behind the silence. But the silence won. It always wins. I pointed vaguely toward the back of the shop, my face heating up to a shade of red that felt like a physical burn. Liam didn't leave, though. He lingered, his hand resting on the wooden counter, just inches from mine. "Actually," he said softly, "I was hoping for your personal recommendation. You always seem to be holding the most interesting books." I looked up, and for a split second, our eyes met. I saw kindness there, and a hint of something else. Was it nerves? Was Liam, the most perfect person I'd ever seen, actually nervous too? The thought was so shocking it almost gave me the strength to speak, but then the phone rang, the bell chimed as another customer entered, and the spell was broken. I retreated into the safety of the back room, my heart aching with the weight of everything I couldn't say. The back room of the Inkwell is a cramped, dusty space filled with cardboard boxes, broken spines, and the persistent smell of old glue. It's where I go when the world outside becomes too loud or too bright. After my disastrous non-interaction with Liam, I sat on a stack of unopened biographies and buried my face in my hands. The silence in the room felt mocking. I could hear the muffled sounds of the shop, the creak of the floorboards, the low murmur of Liam talking to Mr. Henderson. I felt a deep, hollow sense of frustration. Why is it so hard? Why can't I just be one of those people who can talk about the weather or the news without feeling like I'm performing a Shakespearean monologue for a hostile audience? I've spent 24 years inside this skin, and yet I still feel like a stranger in my own body whenever someone looks at me. It's like there's a delay between my soul and my voice, a lag that makes everything I say feel clumsy and outdated. I stayed in the back room for nearly an hour, pretending to be busy with a shipment of historical fiction that didn't actually need sorting. I knew Liam was gone, but the ghost of his presence still lingered in the front of the shop. I could still see the way his fingers had brushed the edge of the counter, the way the light had caught the gold flecks in his eyes. I pulled out my journal, the one I keep hidden in my apron pocket. In there, I am a different Ella. I am witty, I am eloquent, and I am brave. I wrote, "He asked for a recommendation today." I wanted to tell him about the way Mary Oliver writes about the light in the trees. I wanted to tell him that sometimes, when I see him walk through the door, the world feels less like a struggle and more like a poem. Instead, I pointed at the trash can. I am a genius of self-destruction. Writing it down helped, as it always does, but the ink on the page couldn't replace the warmth of a real conversation. When I finally emerged, Mr. Henderson was sitting behind the counter, peering over his spectacles at a ledger. He didn't look up, but he spoke in his usual dry, observational tone. He's a nice lad, that Liam. Patient. A bit too fond of the romantics, perhaps, but a good lad. My face flushed again. I didn't know Mr. Henderson was paying that much attention. I grabbed a duster and started aggressively cleaning a shelf that was already spotless. "He left this for you," Mr. Henderson added, sliding a small, folded piece of paper across the counter. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it had been physically removed from my chest. I stared at the paper as if it were a live coal. It was a simple, off-white slip of paper, probably torn from the back of a receipt. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and retreated to the poetry section, shielding myself behind the high shelves of modern classics. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was messy but purposeful. The letters slanted to the right as if they were in a hurry. It said, "I'm sorry if I startled you today. I think I'm a bit more awkward than I look. I'm having a small gathering at my place this Friday, mostly just people from my architecture course and a few friends. I'd really love it if you came. You don't have to stay long, and you don't even have to talk to anyone. We could just exist in the same room for a bit. There's an address below. Liam." I read it 3 times, then a 4th. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. He wanted me to go to a party. A party, the natural habitat of my worst nightmares. A place filled with music, loud laughter, and the terrifying expectation of small talk. And yet, the phrase, "we could just exist in the same room for a bit," felt like a lifeline. He understood. He saw my silence and didn't see it as a flaw. He saw it as a choice. The rest of the week was a blur of internal conflict. One half of my brain, the logical, self-preserving half, told me to stay home, lock the door, and watch documentaries about deep-sea creatures who never have to see another living soul. The other half, the one that was tired of being a shadow, kept rereading the note. I spent my evenings trying on every piece of clothing I owned, looking for an outfit that whispered, "I'm interesting, but please don't look at me." I settled on a dark navy dress and a cardigan that felt like a hug. On Friday afternoon, I stood in the shop, staring at the clock. Every tick felt like a countdown. Mr. Henderson watched me, his eyes twinkling with a rare bit of amusement. "Go on then, Ella," he said as the clock hit 5 o'clock. "The books will still be here on Monday. Go see the boy." I nodded, grabbed my bag, and walked out into the cool evening, feeling like I was stepping onto another planet. The address was a flat in a trendy part of the town, an area that always felt a bit too cool and a bit too loud for me. As I walked from the station, I could feel my anxiety beginning to manifest physically. My breath was shallow, my hands were shaking in my pockets, and my brain was running through a list of 100 things that could go wrong. I would walk in and trip. I would spill a drink on Liam. I would be asked a question and my voice would crack like a 13-year-old boy's. I reached the building and stood outside the front door for 10 minutes, watching people come and go. I could hear music thumping from an upper floor, not too loud, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I almost turned around. I almost walked back to the safety of my quiet flat. But then I remembered the note. You don't even have to talk to anyone. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pressed the buzzer, and stepped into the light. The hallway of the apartment building smelled of expensive laundry detergent and wood smoke. As I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step felt like a heavy stone I was dragging behind me. My mind was a chaotic mess of, what am I doing here, and please let there be a corner to hide in. When I reached apartment 3B, the door was slightly ajar, letting out the warm glow of yellow lamps and the low, rhythmic hum of indie folk music. I stood there for a heartbeat, my hand hovering over the wood, feeling like an imposter. I'm the girl who writes about life, not the girl who lives it. But before I could turn and flee back down the stairs, the door swung open and there he was. Liam wasn't wearing a coat this time, just a simple white t-shirt and dark jeans. He looked human, vulnerable, and incredibly handsome. "Ella, you came," he said, and the genuine relief in his voice was so unexpected that it momentarily silenced my internal panic. He didn't move toward me or try to hug me. He just stepped back and held the door open, giving me plenty of space. "I was worried I'd scared you off with my messy handwriting." I managed a small, shy smile, the kind that barely reaches my eyes, but feels like a huge effort. I stepped inside and realized the party wasn't the roaring, chaotic event I had feared. There were maybe 10 people in the room, scattered across mismatched sofas and beanbags, talking in low voices. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted vegetables. It was an introvert-friendly party, and the realization made the tightness in my chest loosen just a fraction. Liam led me toward a small table in the corner where a bottle of sparkling water and some glass cups were set out. I saved you a spot, he whispered, pointing to a high-backed armchair nestled between a bookshelf and a large potted plant. I sat down, feeling the velvet fabric of the chair against my back. It was a fortress. From here, I could observe the room without being in the center of it. Liam brought me a glass of water and then sat on the floor near my feet, leaning his back against the bookshelf. He didn't ask me how my week was. He didn't ask me what I thought of the music. He just sat there, and for the first 10 minutes, we simply existed in the same room. It was the most profound silence I had ever experienced with another person. Usually, silence with a stranger feels like a ticking clock, a pressure that builds until someone has to break it with a meaningless comment about the weather. But with Liam, the silence felt like a shared secret. It was a language we both understood. I watched the other people in the room. They were architects. I gathered from their conversation, and I realized that they weren't the intimidating giants I had imagined. They were just people, flawed and nervous in their own ways. After a while, Liam looked up at me, his eyes soft in the lamplight. I like your bookstore, Ella. It's the only place in this town where the air feels still. I took a small sip of my water, my throat finally feeling clear enough to attempt a few words. I looked at the bookshelf behind him. It was filled with technical manuals on structural engineering, but also a well-worn copy of The Little Prince. I like it too, I whispered. My voice was thin, like a piece of silk, but it was there. It was real. Liam smiled, a slow, genuine expression that reached his eyes and stayed there. I know it's hard for you, he said softly, so low that only I could hear him over the music. The world is so loud, isn't it? It's like everyone is shouting just to prove they exist. But I've always thought the most interesting things are said in the whispers. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to look away. I have a lot of whispers, I said, the words feeling heavy but necessary. It was the most honest thing I had ever said to someone who wasn't my mother or a blank page in a journal. Liam nodded, as if he had known that all along. I know. I can see them in your eyes when you're organizing the books. You look like someone who has a whole library inside her head. We spent the next hour talking, or rather, he talked, and I contributed in small, carefully chosen sentences. He told me about his dream of designing buildings that felt like forests, places where people could feel connected to nature even in the heart of the city. I listened, captivated by the passion in his voice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I was just Ella, sitting in a velvet chair, listening to a boy who saw the world the same way I did. When it was time to leave, Liam walked me to the door. The other guests were still talking, their voices a comfortable murmur in the background. At the threshold, he stopped and looked at me, his hand resting on the doorframe. Can I see you again, Ella? Not just at the shop? Maybe we could go to the park, or somewhere quiet. My heart did a somersault. This was the moment where the old Ella would have panicked and said something vague like, maybe, or we'll see. But the girl who had just sat in a velvet chair for 2 hours felt a little bit braver. Yes, I said, my voice clearer than it had been all night. I'd like that. He smiled, and as I walked down the stairs and out into the night, the world didn't feel quite so loud anymore. The air felt cool and full of possibility, and for the first time in 24 years, I felt like I was finally starting to live my own story. The days following the party felt like they were infused with a new kind of light. I went to work at the Inkwell with a spring in my step that even Mr. Henderson noticed. He didn't say anything, of course, but he did give me a particularly nice bookmark, a silk one with a pattern of pressed wildflowers, which was his version of a congratulatory hug. I spent my time between customers thinking about Liam, replaying our conversation in my head until I knew every inflection of his voice. I found myself looking at the history section and the poetry section with a different perspective. These weren't just shelves of paper anymore. They were the bridges that had connected me to another soul. But as the date for our quiet walk approached, the old, familiar tendrils of anxiety began to creep back into my mind. The first date pressure was a monster I hadn't yet learned how to slay. Monday was a blur of nervous energy. I spent my lunch break in the park, sitting on a bench and trying to practice normal conversation topics. I looked at the ducks and tried to think of something witty to say about them, but all my brain could produce was, ducks are orange-footed. I sighed, burying my face in my hands. How could I go on a date? A date requires continuous interaction. There would be no bookshelves to hide behind, no customers to distract us, no velvet armchairs to act as a fortress. It would just be me and him, and the terrifying expanse of open air. I felt like a deep-sea creature that had been suddenly dragged to the surface. I was afraid the light would burn me, and the lack of pressure would make me fall apart. By Tuesday morning, I was a nervous wreck, my stomach in knots and my voice feeling like it had been replaced by a handful of dry sand. Liam arrived at the shop at 5 p.m., just as I was locking up. He was wearing a soft, oversized sweater and a beanie, looking perfectly relaxed. "Ready for our adventure?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with that smile I was beginning to crave. I managed a nod and followed him toward the nearby park. The walk was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence I was used to. Liam seemed to understand that I needed time to calibrate. He pointed out interesting architectural details on the buildings we passed, a Victorian gargoyle here, a modern glass extension there. He talked about the rhythm of the street, and I found myself nodding, my anxiety slowly receding as he pulled me into his world of shapes and shadows. By the time we reached the park, the sun was starting to set, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. We found a quiet spot near a large willow tree, away from the joggers and the families. We sat on the grass, the blades cool and slightly damp against my palms. For a while, we just watched the wind move through the willow branches, the leaves sounding like a soft, green rain. "I brought something," Liam said, reaching into his bag. He pulled out 2 small, leather-bound sketchbooks and 2 pencils. He handed one to me. I thought, since talking is sometimes a bit much, maybe we could draw what we see. No pressure. No one has to see it but you. I looked at the blank page, and I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost made my eyes sting. He wasn't trying to change me. He wasn't trying to fix my shyness. He was giving me a tool to communicate without words. I began to sketch. I'm not an artist, but there's something meditative about the way a pencil moves across paper. I drew the curve of the willow branch, the way the light hit the water of the nearby pond, and then, slowly, I drew the silhouette of the boy sitting next to me. I felt a strange sense of intimacy in the shared silence. We were creating together, side by side, our only conversation the scratching of graphite against paper. It was the most perfect date I could have imagined. After about an hour, the light was too dim to continue. Liam closed his sketchbook and looked at me. "Can I see?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then slowly turned my sketchbook toward him. He looked at my drawing of him for a long time. "You see me better than I see myself, Ella," he whispered. We walked back to the station in the twilight, the city lights beginning to twinkle like fallen stars. At the entrance to the station, he stopped and turned to me. "I know this might be a bit much, Ella, but there's something I want to tell you." My heart started its familiar drumbeat. I've spent a lot of time around people who never stop talking. People who fill the air with noise just because they're afraid of what they might hear in the quiet. But being with you, it's like finally being able to hear the music. I don't want you to feel like you have to be anyone else. I like the whispers. He leaned in and gave me a soft, lingering kiss on the cheek. The skin there felt like it was on fire. "See you Tuesday, Ella," he said, and then he disappeared into the crowd. I stood there for a long time, the cold air on my face, feeling like I had finally, truly been seen. The honeymoon phase of our quiet romance was a beautiful, fragile thing. Over the next month, we developed our own secret language. We went to museums where we'd stand in front of paintings for 20 minutes without saying a word. We went to old cinemas to watch films, holding hands in the dark. We communicated through notes tucked into books at the shop and through sketches shared in the park. I was still shy, terrifyingly so in most situations, but with Liam, I was starting to find a new version of myself. I was learning that my silence wasn't a wall, but a garden, and for the first time, I had invited someone inside to help me tend to it. I felt a sense of belonging that I had never known before. But as any story goes, the world has a way of crashing into your sanctuary when you least expect it. The crisis arrived on a rainy Thursday morning in the form of a legal envelope delivered to the Inkwell. I watched as Mr. Henderson opened it, his hands trembling slightly as he read the contents. His face, usually a mask of stoic calm, turned a pale, sickly gray. He sat down heavily in his old wooden chair, the letter fluttering to the floor. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the harsh, technical language. The building had been sold to a large developer, and our rent was being tripled. If we couldn't pay a massive security deposit by the end of the month, the shop would be closed, and our books, would be liquidated. I felt a cold, sharp spike of panic. This shop was my life. It was my fortress, my home, and the place where I had met Liam. The thought of it being turned into a generic coffee shop or a luxury clothing store felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Mr. Henderson looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary, defeated sadness. "I'm too old for this, Ella," he whispered. "I don't have the fight in me anymore. Maybe it's time to let the old girl go." I wanted to shout no. I wanted to tell him that we could find a way, that we could fight the developers and save the shop. But as usual, the words were stuck in my throat, a heavy lump of emotion that I couldn't move. I spent the rest of the day in a state of mourning, dusting the shelves as if I were preparing a body for a funeral. Every book I touched felt like a memory I was about to lose. I felt a deep, burning anger at a world that only valued profit over soul, noise over quiet. That evening, I met Liam at our usual spot in the park. The rain had turned into a fine mist, and the air was cold. I didn't have my sketchbook today, I just had the heavy weight of the news. I told him what happened, not in words, but by showing him the letter. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening as he reached the end. "This is wrong, Ella," he said, his voice hard. "We can't just let them take it. The Inkwell is part of the soul of this neighborhood." I nodded, my eyes filling with tears. "But what can we do?" I whispered, the words finally breaking through. "We need so much money." Liam looked at me, his eyes intense and full of a sudden, brilliant idea. "The Grand Poetry Slam," he said. "The grand prize is $10,000. It's exactly what the deposit is. And it's next week." I stared at him in horror. A poetry slam? A competition where people stand on a stage, under bright lights, and perform their work in front of hundreds of people? It was my ultimate nightmare. It was the drama class multiplied by 1,000. I can't, I gasped, the panic rising in my throat like a flood. "Liam, you know I can't. I can barely talk to a barista, let alone a crowd." Liam took my hands, his grip firm and warm. "Ella, you're the most talented writer I have ever met. Your journals, they're full of more heart and truth than anything I've ever heard on a stage. You don't have to perform. You just have to read. Read for the shop. Read for Mr. Henderson. Read for us." I pulled my hands away, my body shaking. "No, I can't. Find someone else. Find a real poet." I turned and ran into the mist, the sound of my own frantic breathing the only thing I could hear. I spent the next 2 days in a state of total isolation. I didn't go to work, and I didn't answer Liam's calls. I sat in my flat, the curtains drawn, surrounded by the silence that had always been my protector. But for the first time, the silence felt empty. It felt like a cowardly choice. I looked at the stacks of journals on my desk, years of whispers that had never been heard. I thought about Mr. Henderson's sad eyes. I thought about the smell of vanilla and old paper in the shop. And I thought about Liam, who believed in me more than I believed in myself. I realized that if I let my shyness win this time, it wouldn't just be my voice that died, it would be everything I loved. I picked up my pen, my hand still shaking, and began to write. Not a journal entry. Not a sketch. A poem. A poem for the shop, for the quiet, and for the boy who saw the library inside my head. The week leading up to the poetry slam was the longest and most terrifying period of my life. Every second was a battle between the girl who wanted to hide under her covers and the woman who was trying to find her voice. I went back to the shop, and the sight of the closing soon sign in the window was the only thing that kept me from backing out. Mr. Henderson didn't ask where I'd been. He just nodded as I walked in, his eyes focusing on the floor. Liam came by every day, but he didn't push me. He just brought me tea and sat with me while I worked, his presence a silent reminder that I wasn't doing this alone. He helped me edit the poem, suggesting where to breathe and where to let the silence sit. The silence is part of the poem, Ella, he told me. It's the space where the audience gets to feel. I practiced the poem every night until my throat was raw. I stood in front of my mirror, trying to imagine the sea of faces, trying to imagine the lights. The old panic was still there, the cold spike in my chest, the way my tongue felt like a foreign object, but I started to look at it differently. I started to see the anxiety not as a wall, but as a source of energy. It was the raw, unrefined power of my emotions, and I just had to channel it into the words. I wrote and rewrote the stanzas until they felt like a part of my own heartbeat. The poem was called The Architecture of Whispers, and it was a love letter to the quiet places of the world. It was about how the most important things in life aren't shouted, but felt in the spaces between words. The night of the competition arrived with a cold, biting wind. The venue was a converted warehouse, a space filled with industrial lights, exposed brick, and a large, wooden stage that looked like a gallows to me. Liam walked me to the entrance, his hand resting on the small of my back. "You don't have to win, Ella," he whispered. "You just have to show up. That's the victory." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was full of dry leaves. I went backstage, a cramped area filled with other poets who looked terrifyingly confident. They were pacing, reciting their lines with booming voices, their bodies full of a restless, performative energy. I felt like a sparrow in a room full of hawks. I sat in a corner, clutching my notebook to my chest, my eyes closed, trying to remember the smell of the bookstore. The competition began, and I could hear the muffled roar of the crowd and the rhythmic chanting of the other poets. Some were political, some were funny, some were angry. They all had a command of the stage that I could never hope to achieve. Each time the announcer called another name, my heart jumped into my throat. I felt like I was going to be physically sick. I looked at the exit door, and for a split second, I actually stood up to run. But then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Liam. He had managed to slip backstage for a moment. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a small piece of paper. I opened it. It was a sketch he had made of me sitting in the velvet chair at his party. Underneath, he had written, "The world is waiting for the whisper." "Next up, we have Ella," the announcer boomed. I felt the air leave my lungs. I walked out onto the stage, the transition from the dim backstage to the blinding spotlights making me stumble. The crowd was a dark, amorphous mass, hundreds of eyes boring into me. I stood at the microphone, the silence of the room feeling like a physical weight. For a long, agonizing minute, I couldn't move. I looked at the microphone, then at my notebook, then at the exit. The old panic was back, stronger than ever. I could feel the audience starting to shift, a low murmur of confusion rippling through the room. I was failing. I was the shaking girl again. But then I looked toward the front row. There, in the dim light, I saw Liam. He wasn't looking at the stage with pity. He was looking at me with a calm, steady belief. He gave me a small nod. I took a deep, shuddering breath, opened my notebook, and leaned into the microphone. My voice started as a whisper, so low the sound technician had to frantically adjust the levels. In a world built of steel and shouting, I began. My voice shook, and I stumbled over the word steel, a genuine, painful stammer that made the room go even quieter. But I didn't stop. I used the tremor. I let the audience hear the struggle. I read the poem not as a performance, but as a confession. I told them about the bookstore, about the light in the willow tree, and about the boy who taught me that silence wasn't a defect. By the time I reached the final lines, the room was so still I could hear the hum of the lights. I finished the poem, closed my notebook, and walked off the stage into the dark. The silence that followed my reading was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the awkward, judgmental silence of my childhood. It was a heavy, emotional quiet that felt like the entire room was holding its breath. For a second, as I walked toward the backstage steps, I thought I had failed. I thought the silence meant I had been too quiet, too small, too insignificant. But then, as my foot hit the first step, the room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of appreciation that felt like a physical wave hitting my back. I didn't stop to look. I ran through the backstage area, out the stage door, and into the cold, damp alleyway. I needed to breathe. I needed the world to stop spinning. I leaned against the brick wall, my chest heaving, the cold air stinging my lungs. My hands were still shaking so hard I had to drop my notebook. I felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. I had done it. I had stood on the stage and I hadn't run. I had spoken my whispers to a room full of strangers. I stayed there in the dark for what felt like an hour, listening to the muffled sounds of the competition continuing inside. After a while, the door opened and Liam stepped out. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his sweater and finally, for the first time in months, I let the tears come. "You were incredible, Ella," he whispered into my hair. "You didn't just read a poem, you moved the air in that room." I pulled back, wiping my eyes, my voice still a bit shaky. Did I win?" I asked, the thought of the money and the shop suddenly coming back to me. Liam smiled, a slow, proud look. "They haven't announced the winners yet, but it doesn't matter. Look at this." He pointed to the stage door, where several of the other poets were coming out. They weren't the intimidating hawks I had seen earlier. They looked at me with a genuine, startled respect. One of them, a tall man with a voice like thunder, walked up to me and nodded. "That was the most honest thing I've heard in years, kid," he said. "Thanks for that." We went back inside for the awards ceremony. I sat in the audience next to Liam, my hand tucked firmly in his. The announcer came back onto the stage, holding an envelope. My stomach did a slow, agonizing flip. "Third place. Second place." He read out names I didn't recognize. My heart sank. I hadn't won. The shop was still going to close. I felt a wave of the old, familiar defeat wash over me. I had tried and I had failed. But then, the announcer leaned into the microphone. And finally, the grand prize. For a performance that reminded us all why we write in the first place. Ella. The walk to the stage was a blur. I took the oversized check, shaking the announcer's hand with a grip that was still trembling. I didn't make a speech. I just said thank you into the microphone, my voice clear and steady for the first time in my life. As I walked off the stage, I saw Mr. Henderson in the back of the room, standing near the exit. He was wearing his old corduroy jacket, and he was dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. He looked at me and gave me a small, silent thumbs up. I realized then that the victory wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that I had saved our sanctuary. I had used my greatest weakness to protect the thing I loved the most. Liam met me at the bottom of the steps, his face glowing with pride. We walked out of the warehouse and into the night. The world felt different now. The lights seemed brighter, the air seemed fresher, and the noise of the traffic didn't feel like an assault anymore. We walked back toward the shop, the oversized check tucked under my arm like a shield. "What now, Ella?" Liam asked as we reached the front of the Inkwell. I looked at the dark windows of the shop, the rows of books waiting for us inside. "Now," I whispered, turning to him and pulling him close, "we keep writing the poem." I realized then that my shyness would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to be my whole story. I was a girl who whispered, yes, but those whispers were strong enough to change the world. Saving the Inkwell felt like a miracle, but the aftermath brought a new set of challenges that I hadn't expected. Suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet girl who organized the poetry section. I was the girl who had won the Grand Slam. People started coming into the shop specifically to talk to me. They wanted to know about the poem, they wanted to know my process, and they wanted me to sign their copies of poetry anthologies. For someone with social anxiety, this was a specialized form of torture. I found myself hiding in the back room more often, my heart racing every time the bell above the door chimed. I felt like an imposter. I had performed a version of myself on that stage, a brave, vocal version, but in my daily life, I was still the girl who stammered over her coffee order. Liam was my anchor through all of it. He understood that the fame, as small as it was draining me. He started spending more time at the shop, acting as a sort of unofficial gatekeeper. When people became too demanding or when I looked like I was on the verge of a panic attack, he would gently step in and direct them toward Mr. Henderson or a different section of the store. He never made me feel weak for needing the help. He just saw it as part of our new rhythm. We spent our evenings in the shop after hours, the doors locked and the lights dimmed. We would sit on the floor in the history section, surrounded by the quiet weight of the past, and talk about the future. "I've been thinking about the developer Ella," Liam said one night, his head resting against a stack of biographies. "The one who tried to buy the building. I've been looking into their plans. They're doing this all over, tearing out the heart of neighborhoods to put in luxury flats that no one can afford." I looked at him, the old anger stirring in my chest. "It's wrong," I whispered. "The world doesn't need more glass and steel. It needs more Inkwells." Liam nodded, his eyes intense. "I've been working on a design. A new kind of community space. One that incorporates the bookstore but adds a workshop area, a garden, and a place for people to just be quiet. I want to pitch it to the local council as a protected cultural site." I looked at him, amazed by his ambition and his vision. He wasn't just an architect, he was a builder of sanctuaries. "But I'd have to speak again, wouldn't I?" I asked, the fear cold in my stomach. "At the council meeting?" Liam took my hand, his grip firm. "Only if you want to, Ella. I can present the technical side. But your voice, your story, that's what will make them listen. You don't have to be a poet this time. You just have to be the girl who loves the shop." I spent the next week thinking about it. I realized that saving the shop with money was only a temporary fix. If we wanted to protect it forever, we had to change the way the city looked at spaces like ours. I had to step out of the shadows one more time. The council meeting was held in a grand, wood-paneled room. It was filled with officials in suits, angry residents, and the cold, corporate representatives of the development company. I sat in the front row, my hands tucked under my thighs to hide the shaking. When it was our turn, Liam stood up and presented his designs. He spoke with a confidence and a passion that made my heart swell. He showed them how the bookstore could be the center of a new, vibrant community hub that valued culture over profit. The council members looked interested, but the lead developer stood up and dismissed the plan with a wave of his hand. "It's a nice dream, Mr. Vance, but it doesn't make economic sense. This town needs housing, not old books." The room went quiet, and I felt the eyes of the council turn toward me. They knew who I was, the poet of the city. I felt the familiar, crushing weight of the silence. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I looked at Liam, and he gave me that small, steady nod. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I didn't have a poem this time. I didn't have a notebook. I just had the truth. "This shop isn't just about books," I said, my voice quiet but clear, echoing in the grand room. "It's about the people who don't fit anywhere else. It's about the quiet ones, the observers, the ones who need a place to breathe. If you take away the Inkwells of the world, you're not just building houses, you're building a world that has nowhere for its soul to live." The silence in the town hall was different from the silence in the warehouse. This was a heavy, thoughtful quiet, the kind that happens when a room full of people is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The lead developer tried to interject, but one of the council members, an older woman with sharp eyes and a kind face, held up a hand to silence him. She looked at me for a long time, as if she were reading the pages of a book. "Thank you, miss." "Ella," she said softly. "I think we have a lot to consider." The meeting was adjourned, and as we walked out into the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done my part. I had spoken my truth without the armor of poetry, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was going to collapse. The next few months were a whirlwind of negotiations, community meetings, and architectural revisions. Liam worked tirelessly on the project, and I found myself becoming an unofficial spokesperson for the Save Our Sanctuaries movement. I was still shy, I still preferred the back room of the shop to a podium, but I was learning how to manage it. I realized that my anxiety was like a weather system. It would always be there, but I could learn how to navigate through the storms. With Liam by my side, the world didn't feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a place that was waiting to be shaped by the people who cared. The victory came in late spring. The council voted to designate the Inkwell and the surrounding buildings as a protected cultural district. The developers' plans were rejected, and Liam's design for the community hub was approved for a pilot program. We had won. The shop was safe, and more than that, it was going to become something even more beautiful. Mr. Henderson was so happy he actually laughed, a dry, wheezing sound that made my eyes fill with tears. We celebrated in the shop, just the three of us, with a bottle of sparkling juice and some lemon biscuits. It was the most perfect celebration of my life. But as the business of saving the shop settled down, I realized that I had one more whisper to attend to. My relationship with Liam had grown into something deep and profound, but we had always been so focused on the crisis that we hadn't really talked about us. I knew I loved him. I had loved him since the first time he walked through the door, but the words felt like the final, most difficult mountain to climb. How do you tell the person who saved your life that they are your whole world? How do you say I love you when even hello is a struggle? I spent my nights writing in my journal, trying to find the perfect arrangement of syllables, but nothing felt quite right. I decided to do it our way. One Tuesday afternoon, after the shop had closed, I led Liam to the poetry section. I had spent the morning tucking small, handwritten notes into the books we had shared over the past few months. I watched as he found the first one in some love poems. It said, "You saw the library inside my head." He moved to the history section and found the next one in a book on architecture. "You taught me that silence is a language." He found the final note in the back of my own sketchbook, the one I had left on the counter. It said, "I love you, Liam." Not in a whisper, but in every word I have ever written. I stood by the window, my heart hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm. Liam finished reading the notes and walked over to me. He didn't say anything at first. He just took my face in his hands, his eyes searching mine. I saw the same kindness there, the same calm aura that had first drawn me to him. "I've known since the first Tuesday, Ella," he whispered. "I didn't need the notes. I could hear it in the way you organized the shelves." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, lingering kiss that felt like the final stanza of a long, beautiful poem. In that moment, the world outside was loud and chaotic, but inside the shop, among the vanilla-scented pages and the quiet weight of the past, everything was perfectly still. I had found my voice, and I had found my home. A year has passed since the council meeting, and the Inkwell has been transformed. It's now the city sanctuary, a beautiful, light-filled space where the bookstore remains at its heart, but is surrounded by a community garden, a quiet writing room, and a small gallery for local artists. Mr. Henderson is still there, though he spends more time sitting in the garden than behind the counter. Liam is the lead architect for the district, helping other neighborhoods protect their own sanctuaries. And me? I'm still the girl in the poetry section, but I'm also the director of the writing workshops we hold every Saturday for shy children. Watching those kids walk through the door, their eyes wide with the same fear I used to feel, is the most rewarding thing I have ever done. I tell them the same thing Liam told me. The world is waiting for the whisper. I help them find their voices through ink and paper, showing them that being quiet isn't a defect, but a different way of being powerful. We create a space where they don't have to perform, where they can just exist in the same room until they're ready to speak. I've realized that my social anxiety was never a cage. It was the training ground for my empathy. Because I know what it's like to be afraid of the world, I know how to make the world a little less frightening for others. My relationship with Liam continues to be my greatest adventure. We still have our quiet walks in the park, our shared sketches, and our secret language of notes. I still have bad days where the world feels too loud and my voice feels like it's been lost in the fog, but I don't panic anymore. I know that Liam will be there to hold my hand in the silence, and I know that the words will come back when they're ready. We're planning our wedding for the fall, a small, quiet ceremony in the community garden, surrounded by the people we love and the books that brought us together. I'm writing my own vows, and for the first time, I'm not worried about the syllables. I look back at the girl who used to hide in the back room of the bookstore, and I feel a deep sense of gratitude for her. She was the one who kept the whispers alive. She was the one who had the courage to write when she couldn't speak. She is the foundation of the woman I am today. I've learned that life isn't about curing who you are. It's about finding the courage to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to change you. I am Ella, and I am a writer, and I am a lover of quiet things. My voice may still tremble, and my hands may still shake, but I am no longer a shadow. I am a person who has found her place in the light, on her own terms. As I sit here in the shop tonight, the sun setting over the skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the shelves, I feel a profound sense of peace. The world is still loud, still fast, still demanding, but it doesn't bother me anymore. I have my sanctuary, I have my voice, and I have the boy who heard the music in my silence. The story of the shaking girl has ended, and a new story has begun. It's a story about whispers that turned into a song, about a bookstore that became a heart, and about a girl who finally realized that she was always enough, just as she was. The world is full of noise, yes, but if you listen closely, you can hear the beauty in the quiet. And that, I think, is the most important thing I have ever written.